Hello and welcome to the Peace Talk. My name is Josef Mühlbauer. I'm a political scientist, editor of several books, and I'm delighted to present to you Rahaf Aldoughli. Rahaf Aldoughli is a lecturer in Middle East and North African Studies at Lancaster University. Prestigious organizations such as Women in International Security in Washington, D.C., the Kroc Institute Fellowship, and among others, the Arab Center for Graduate Studies have recognized her work, and so she's in her field expert with awards and grants. Her research interests span nationalism, sectarianism, and political attitudes within authoritarian contexts, adopting an interdisciplinary approach. In today's talk, we will discuss among others, her book Romanticizing Masculinity in Ba'athist Syria, Gender, Ideology and Identity. Dear Rahaf, it's a great privilege and honor to talk to you. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much, Josef. Thanks for this great invitation and the opportunity to talk about my book.
Let us begin with a more broader question. Let's define terms and concepts so that everybody knows what we are talking about. Let us begin with the relation between masculinity and conflicts, or masculinity and ideology. So in that sense, let's talk about the central terms in your book and articles. In what sense do you use the term masculinity, and how is it connected to politics, ideology, and war and conflict?
Well, thank you so much about this question, which kind of will take me to the initial phase of when I decided to write this book, actually 10 years ago, a decade, when I started with my PhD, I thought like Syria was already under conflict. We had the revolution was in its early phase, then the emergence of armed groups, and then there were very central questions among Syrians in diaspora, and even the revolutionary narrative that kind of centralized on a very romanticized belonging to Syria or to Damascus, and even the use of terms such as Damascene is Jasmine, and also the kind of rhetoric that kind of central on the certain behavior that asks Syrian citizens to have certain performative actions towards the nation, and that particularly made me. The first question that I had, what makes people fight and kill for the nation? And actually, I started with a book. Now, I did not prepare myself to remember that early, actually, book that led me to this book. Yeah, more than 10 years ago, actually, when I was doing also my MA. That book was initially asking these questions about the rule of blood, but symbolically how people or citizens or men feel that they are by blood, in blood relations, that they are connected together, and the nation is like a mother figure. And with the conceptualization of the nation as a mother or as a woman or as a lover, then the man becomes the one responsible to protect the nation. And here we have a romanticized relationship, or the social contract between the citizens and the nation or the state becomes so much involuntarily and is not expressing civic relation with the nation. So citizenship becomes defined not by the rights and responsibility, but by the involuntarily fighting and killing for the nation or for the leader and whatsoever. Now, when I started going through and actually one of the questions that I had was very, very personal and goes back to my own positionality as a Syrian woman. And I felt like my belonging to Syria is constrained by my memories of a very masculine status that dominates all spaces in Syria, and even on our school handbook, and even when we are singing in national days, we sing for the leader, we sing for the army, but the women are just like invisible. So, and actually, when I started with the idea, where does the idea of the nation come from? And it came from actually the German thinking. It came from also the national borrowings came from the German or the French, and maybe we will touch on that. But actually, conflict and masculinity, and let me just end the answer with one thing. I have never considered that we were in peace in Syria before the revolution or before the uprising. I think we always had passive peace, and we had a conflict dynamics, but like invisible. And so masculinity becomes central to the national ideology that sustained the authoritarianism of 50 years of party's rule. So it doesn't mean that masculinity always comes or emerge in times of war or military confrontation. It can be taken as a tool that make us understand why countries descend into civil conflicts or violence actions.
Absolutely interesting. And as far as I remember, in my course from Saskia Stachowicz, Gender and Military or Militarism, I learned that historically masculinity was linked to the nation state. So historically, only if you defend your country and you do your military service, and maybe if you fight, then you get your passport. So then you are, a citizen.
Become a citizen.
Yeah, you become a citizen. And
Yeah.
and historically, women were excluded from the service. So only as a man you can become a normal citizen, so to speak. So here we see the historical, intertwinement between masculinity.
And Syria is not exceptional. So the birth of the nation state in Syria is like many other countries or states around the world. We have the born of that the nation state was in its infancy, and let's not forget that Syria was emerged out of the fall of the Ottoman Empire, where nationalism was in its height in the Middle East, and we started like to build nation states. Intrinsically, the concept of nationalism is a masculine construct. However, it's left to the states and to the governing bodies to come and try to alleviate and build a civic conceptualization of belonging to the nation, where the masculinity or the masculine construct of citizenship become less and less. I'm not saying like you will end it or that it will vanish, but somehow it will not have that kind of hierarchical positioning within the state.
And in your article, The End of Revolutions, but not the end of revolutionaries, insights from Syrian fighters, I have many questions. So maybe let's begin with the research as you conducted it. So how did you conduct this research? What did you do? Did you do your research by observing or by conducting interviews? Or let's begin with the methodology.
Yeah. The methodology for my latest projects on Syrian fighters in particular, it's not part of I thought because there has been so many scholarship on Syrian armed groups, and however, I haven't seen any article that kind of focus on fighters' narratives. I was thinking that I want to personalize their experiences, and I use the role of emotions. The emotions has never been a part of my expertise, but I started to use emotion as a theoretical framework because of the narratives of these Syrian fighters. Now, my methodology was a qualitative analysis, so qualitative interviews. I know the most of the times I got the questions, how did I get access to these fighters? It's a long story. It didn't start, I had my own challenges as a woman, but as a Syrian woman, that gave me access, but at the same time, it caused me lots of challenges. However, one of the central things that I have considers in these interviews is being getting the cultural background of these fighters, or the cultural dynamics within that kind of took this research. Part of it was on making sure that I build a trust with these fighters, and I make sure that their experiences and their narratives is depicted in and analyzed in a way that gives contextualization, and not to be essentialist or to take words out of context. And that's really important. And one of the other things that I also try to take into consideration in these interviews is respect and not being judgmental. That's very much similar, because sometimes these fighters think, because of the way I dress, or that I will be judgment on their narratives, or when they talk about religion, the role of religion, and so I had to make sure that to tell them that I'm not judgmental, and for most of the parts I had to share, and that's one of the methodological challenges, that you need to go back to your family background and tell them to build that trust. So it was difficult, but at the same time, it was very, very rewarding for me personally.
And did you feel safe at all time? And where did you conduct your interviews? I believe not on the front line. So maybe in some safer space like Turkey, or
Yes, it was between Turkey on the borders, in southern Turkey in particular, and recently in Syria. It was not completely safe. I always get this question, but I was naive, I think. Most of the interviews that were conducted, but I always made sure to have a third party with me. And also the gender dynamic is really important. I had with me a female assistant, which kind of that will give the fighter or the central commander the freedom to express. So I didn't want to have another male figure that would, because I was focusing on the emotional narratives of these fighters, and sometimes it needs kind of certain kind of quiet, intimate location. It's most of these central commanders or these armed groups who are backed up by Turkey. Their offices are in southern Turkey, and they are in some. Sometimes I would go to a building. It looks like a flat, but it's full of military figures. And I was yes, that was difficult for me, but it was manageable. With so many connections from the Syrian community. So I'd be sharing my location, and so all of these steps.
I totally understand you, yes. And also I understand the approach. So you need to, so that the soldiers can feel comfortable, can be honest, and can open up, because you touch on a lot of emotional topics, and it's not easy to, so another question that is important, maybe, do you believe that they can be sincere and honest, maybe if they conduct some war crimes, or horrific stuff against, for example, women, especially in front of a woman? Do you believe that they will honestly tell you their,
Yeah, okay. Thank you so much for this question. Actually, because of this question, I received it like a year ago when I was conducting this field work, and I was in a conference, whereas someone asked me, a scholar asked me this question, and that kind of contributed to me writing an article about, and it's still under review now. But I think them, first of all, I have always started the interview with them by saying that I don't want to know about any war crime. Surprisingly, they would tell you extensively about how many they arrested, how many sometimes they killed, how many they kidnapped, how many they. But then I would stop them and tell them, I don't want to know. This is for your safety and my safety. This is one thing. Another thing that's really important, some of these stories were not part of my analysis. So I left them out because I felt sometimes they became more heroic in expressing themselves because I am a woman. So I was very much even reflective, and that kind of made me write an article that's more of a reflective article on my positionality and the gender dynamic when I'm conducting interviews with fighters, because masculinity also popped up. Yeah, like it came in all kind of the narratives, but I had the decision that I don't want to focus on masculinity. I want to work on emotions. But then I couldn't actually end this project without writing a chapter, or sorry, a journal article on masculinity. And actually, believe me, Joseph, for Syrian armed groups, and I conducted more than 100 hours of interviews with these Syrian fighters by using and employing an interdisciplinary and multi-level analysis. So I used emotions, the grievances as all theoretical framework. However, it makes me like, for every armed faction, I use a certain theory. Actually, Joseph, the one theoretical framework that defines or kind of encompass all of these motivations of fighters is masculinity. So even like you cannot miss masculinity and the way the identity of the fighter become constructed and fused with the revolution. And that's why I called it the end of the revolution, but not revolutionary, because they become fused with the revolution. And that's kind of the, even with the end of the revolution, when it is fused and synonymized with the identity of these fighters, it becomes inseparable. And that actually will obstruct and make lots of challenges to build the civic concept of the nation, or to have because the more you have attachment and that kind of inseparable relation, then it becomes more of the involuntarily or the essential or a primordial tie to the nation, which is almost always end up with a cycle of violence.
Maybe because there are many groups, and to understand it better, for example, loyalists are fighting for Assad and against the so-called terrorist. In their ideology, they are fighting always against the terrorist. Everybody who is against the regime is automatically a terrorist. So, religious fundamentalist groups such as Al-Qaeda, they are fighting for Sharia, for religious purposes, and so on and so forth. And you are telling me now that all these different groups, despite their different ideology, different religious, attitudes, and despite their different moral attitudes and so on.
You cannot miss a code, Joseph. You cannot miss a code without the gender element there. So, yeah.
Okay, fascinating, yes. So this was your key finding. So despite the differences, this is the common element.
The common element, it comes even, there is an article that will come out soon, hopefully, where I kind of added masculinity to this analysis, and I called it the grievous masculinity. So grievous masculinity, where there's lots of grievances and personal loss, and there is trauma, and it becomes as a response to this traumatic events or dysphoric memories. They build a masculinist response to that by calling it grievous masculinity, where these fighters chose to fight. There's another thing that's really important as well, that masculinity might lead, or a certain understanding of one's identity might contribute to the soldier or to the fighter to hold up, to have to join an armed group. But this is not enough, because it might be an incident or a reaction to a certain like a very as I called it in the article, dysphoric memory, like something really traumatizing that led to the initial phase of joining armed groups. However, but this needs continuity. So how would you feed the masculinity to continue fighting? And I think here comes, and this is from actually my findings is emanated from the narratives of these fighters, is that the combat driven masculinity. So masculinity, because even when these fighters want to stop fighting, certain incidents during combat, like experiencing their friends being killed in front of them, experiencing danger in a combat field, all of these kind of incidents and horrific incidents also drive them to continue fighting and even have revenge, and like it will have more of lots of emotions that would contribute to the continuity of fighting.
Absolutely amazing findings, and I was also a little bit laughing when in the introduction you have two quotes from two interviews, and one of them is, for example, have we won the revolution, question mark, or have we failed miserably, or has Assad and Iran won, or shall we say that Assad survived but not won, and Iran will eventually lose in Syria? I don't really have an answer or know what is next for Syria, but the only thing I'm certain of is that I'm a revolutionary and I will stay a revolutionary or remembered as a martyr. And the other quote is, like an orphanate, this revolution is an orphan with nothing but its sons. We are its sons. We are the revolutionaries. So it seems to me that they are not knowing the purpose, and they forgot, okay, or maybe, I don't know, they don't know how to feel it, you know. But one thing is certain, they are fighting, the fight is going on. So yeah, it's right in the introduction.
These two quotes like actually made me, when I centralized these two quotes at the beginning of the article, that made me use also uncertainty identity theory, that kind of also, because of the uncertainty that engulfed the Syrian conflict for more than 13 years, it made the fighters uncertain about their identity, but they need for confirmation, they need validation. So the only thing that gives them confirmatory results is that they will continue fighting. And I think there is one thing as well, that when I wrote this article, it was its findings is from I stopped kind of like I stopped the data at in August 2023, and that was in a period where it's very depressing for all Syrians, that we don't know what's next, and even these armed groups is backed by Turkey, but it's constrained by its military operation, and they don't have the agency to fight or to even have that kind of offense against Assad or attack Assad. So they were engulfed. These fighters were very much uncertain about their future. And let me tell you, in all my research that use fieldwork and interviews and even speech analysis and discourse analysis, it seems the revolution as an idea. And there are certain basic concepts that use, such as al-karama, dignity, hurriya, freedom, and adala, justice. But these are very, very general terms. They are not, they don't tell you something about how to build a state. They tell you about the kind of very generic, that almost all humans have a consensus about this. And also even not only the fighters, that they are uncertain about how to build the nation, even the elites, the Syrian scholars, even the opposition, they seem to have kind of, I think I would call it the curse of an emotional narrative, or the use of an emotionalized narrative. And this is really dangerous, and not only dangerous, it's depressing to build depressing for Syrians who are striving to build a more of a democratic, inclusive nation state, when you are so much fixating on overthrowing only the regime without having what's next, then it is that you become locked or or yeah, like, you know, you become constrained within your ideological framework, like, yeah, position or standpoint.
I understand. But in 2011, when the Arab Spring began, people went on the streets against corruption, for more democratizing Syria, against the Assad rule and dictatorship, and against also poverty, and yeah. So yeah, one can say that there are many layers in the sense. But women also went to the street. So in the beginning, it was a democratic uprising, one can say. And then when the fighting goes on, we can observe that something happens, something. And here comes gender and masculinity into the game.
I think all, like, I have no. You are reminding me of some quotes that will come published in forthcoming articles. It's on masculinity. There is one fighter who told me something like, actually, from the very beginning, the gender dynamic is there. Even with the story about that went viral about the kids from Dar'a who were arrested by the regime and were, like, their nails were they were tortured, and then when the men from Dar'a went to the police officer in Syria, when they were asking about to release these kids, and then there was a story that went viral, which is that bring us your women and we can get you another other children, which was very so shameful, or like to emasculate the fathers of these kids. And I think the gender dynamic has always been there, and even with the early peaceful protests in Syria, women were used sometimes as a way to drive other men to protect and to have arms to protect them. So there was the gender dynamic was there. I had an interview with a fighter who told me that actually initially he was in love with his girlfriend. He was at the university and he was protesting, and then he was harassed by the police officers, and a police officer slapped him because he was protesting. And from that moment, he decided that he will reclaim his dignity and agency, and he swore to God that he will reply back with he took it as a response to join. Others, actually, other fighters who fought beyond borders, even went to Libya. Most of three of them was about that they want to get married, they want to prove themselves as men, they want to provide to the family, blah blah blah. So masculinity kind of has always played a central role, but also it's very difficult to say that. Of course, there are many other factors like the economic, like many other factors that contributed to the rise of violence in Syria.
By what was in the end, because every researcher does go into the field and into the interviews and observations and process with some sort of, I don't want to call it prejudices, but theoretical, assumptions and what was the most surprising for you at the end of your research? So did something change in your mind, or did you expect to find these findings, or what was surprising for you?
Yeah, when I was working on Greed, and I was writing an article about why Syrian fighters chose to go, like why they are called mercenaries when they go and fought in Libya and Africa. That was one of the most difficult theoretical, actually. Theoretically, for me, it was very challenging, this article, because then you have to use Greed, and then I felt like I might be essentializing the narratives of these fighters, that they are all greedy mercenaries and they wanted to go there. And at the beginning, I wanted to use Greed because obviously it was very clear the greed dynamic, the gain dynamic is there. But from my interviews with them and analyzing the data, there was lots of the simultaneity of emotion, grievances, and actually like not the simultaneity of gain and of gain and despair. So it's not only that they were fighting beyond borders and they were called mercenaries in most of these magazines because they went to fight in Libya. It doesn't tell the whole story because one of the whole most of because in Syria they were in a time where it's very much uncertain, the lack of international that there was an international inaction, the fail of the political process. Fighters there who were deployed to go to Libya and Africa, they didn't have any other resource. They were pressured by their armed groups, and they were also pressured by certain socioeconomic situations. And even when they were explaining gain that they need this money, it's because they have lived for a decade displaced, and most of their members were killed, and one fighter told me, like, if he got killed, then the money that will leave, like there is certain amount of money that they can get if they got killed, so their families will get, and that was for him the only thing that he is hoping to leave for his family. So greed does not tell the whole story. And I think when I finished writing this article, I came to believe that even with this kind of binary theoretical framework, it doesn't work, and you need to kind of use more of an interdisciplinary, more of a theories.
Let's now dig a little bit deeper into your work and maybe put it on a historical perspective. So, how has the Syrian conflict reconfigured traditional notions of masculinity, particularly in the relation to militarization and in regard also to the displacement, and also in regard to the shifting roles of man as both perpetrators and also victims of violence? So this is also, let's talk about that very broad
I
question.
think that's thank you for that question as well, because I have, so in Syria under Ba'athist rule, it has always been like a hyperactive masculinity, very visual and very centralized, and it's inputted by speeches, and very central is the cult of the father leader. And then under Bashar al-Assad, it came the lover. Like Bashar al-Assad was always called like, we love you, and it was somehow symbolically depicting the new lover of the nation after his father. Now, after with the conflict starting, I think it started to emerge many other forms of masculinity. So we have the militarized masculinity, we have the hegemonic masculinity, but then we have, I think, the fragile masculinity, the wounded masculinity. We see lots of Syrian men going abroad, living in diaspora, escaping military conscription. Others were lamenting in diaspora's communities from my interviews with them. Where I remember in 2012 when I was making some interviews for my first book, it was like some of men, when they were like expressing their nationalist, their sentiments, they were very much saying like, we don't deserve to be Syrian, we are men, but we left Syria, we didn't fight, we didn't act as men. And then the women were having this conversation, and that the only thing, they were also feeling guilty that they are not in Syria. So they said like, now it's our struggle here, for example, in UK, is to teach our kids Arabic language, our culture, blah blah blah. So I think there is that part where there is the wounded, the fragile masculinity, the one that the masculinity that doesn't want to fight or to fit, or even to be framed as accepted, and they want to be just outside all of these kind of pressured and enforced dynamics. There's also another type of masculinity that I've noticed is the masked one, which is something that I will there are two articles that will come out next in early April about the new forms of masculinity under the new leadership, which is somehow very unlike or very not very dissimilar or very different from the Ba'athist form. The new form is more of a anonymous, masked, not personalized. We see new security men masked with full masks, and also, I did interviews with them, and the central commanders said that to instill fear and intimidation. So masculinity is there, and competitive masculinity as well, because they have in mind, the new leadership has in mind that during the Assad era or the Assad phase of security was very hegemonic and very centralized and very authoritarian. So they wanted to make sure that they are also perceived by Syrians as strong, disciplined, and authoritative.
I understand. And if we consider also the cultural dimension, because, for example, I live in Austria, and Austrians have some sort of, in their culture, or let me put it other way, in our identity, neutrality, for example, is important. Or some military experts say that Austria is a post-heroic society, so we avoid conflicts and we don't want a big, huge military, and so on and so forth. And I encountered, for example, an Albanian young man. For example, when I was invited for military service, I was deemed fit. So, I had to do my service in one way or another. And a young Albanian man next to me was deemed to be unfit because of a heart defect.
Yeah.
And he was so sad, he was almost crying, and I was asking him, what's the deal? I'm glad that be glad you don't have to do the service. You avoid hard time, and it's fine. And he asked me, yeah, but how can I explain it to my father? And this is something like an honor for him, and it has totally different cultural and for identity stuff meaning for him. So I couldn't understand him, but and in regard to that, is it a cultural thing? Is it a identity thing in Syria that men need to be strong and defend the household, and is that the thing? Or
yes, it is something very cultural, deeply cultural, and also I have noticed when I was there is a need to make this statement. Actually, masculinity in Syria is not a top-down kind of process only. It's also a bottom up. So we have the culture, we have the traditions, we have the tribal representations of certain men that kind of more or less reinforce these gender dynamics within the society and within the state as well, because the state has always used to co-opt traditional leaders to force women into kind of, or give them to give women secondary rule, or to follow certain religious dynamics regarding the legal or the kind of the personal legal issues. However, I think it's not something related only in terms of the culture. The culture plays a part, but like when it comes to masculinity or to Ba'athist masculinity, this was only after 2011. It has changed. So Syrians become those who want to fight with the regime they became more of like they are the loyalist base of that regime. Some of them became more because of the sectarian affiliation with the regime. So I'm not talking about all the armed forces within the regime forces. So the question there was about their sect, their survival, the ideological security that they felt. However, for other Syrians who didn't want, Syrian men, they didn't want either to fight with the regime or against the regime. So they were trying to escape. So the military service does not have that kind of cultural kind of acceptance, because it means that the military service or the army, it lost its national sentiments, because the army became the defender of the leader, of one person. It's not the army of Syria or the Syrian states. So being loyal to the nation becomes synonymized or personified with being loyal to one leader in Syria. And I don't think all Syrians, or even those who couldn't escape the military service, would want it to be or believe to be loyal to the regime, because it was forced military service. However, like even with the military service, even if we escape the military service, or these men did not go to the military service, fighting and defending the nation is, yes, it's part of the ideology that has been enforced on all Syrians. And actually, Syria, again, it's not an exceptional case. All the Middle East, all of these Arab countries, actually, they came born out of military coup. They did not came with elections. All of these countries are masculine constructs by all generals, leaders who had certain deals with with certain mandate systems at that time, whether the French or the British, and they stayed in power. And so they all came from the military. And also, let's not forget, when these authoritarian leaders who are military in their background came to power, they did not try to civilize or to change whether the political dynamics or the constitution or the legal institution that was part of the mandate system. So, and then the gender dynamic became reframed or transformed into other forms of masculinities, such as the hyper, the competitive, or even the fragile, that as I've just been telling you.
And how do groups like Hayat Tahrir Asham, HTS in short, instrumentalize these discourses of masculinity in order to legitimize their own authority and or to recruit other followers or, armed men?
Yeah.
And how does this intersect with, their religious or ideological framing in, for example, northwestern Syria? And
I think that's also something that cannot be differentiated or separated from other armed groups, even though other armed groups from other contexts, masculinity or driving men to fight and listening to certain sermons and speeches addressed to fighters is always about using an emotional narrative and masculinity. Yes, HTS, like any other armed groups, use masculine narrative and rhetoric, and that's not less nor more than other armed groups. Like I've examined the FARC narrative. I've examined many other armed groups beyond Syria, where even the Iraqi militias as well. The songs in the Iraqi militias that were used very, very masculine and patriarchal. However, sometimes when it's espoused with religious narrative, it's not only because for these armed groups, whether they are Islamist or secular or whatever, or moderate, they always justify the use of violence. However, when you espouse it or coupled it with a religious fundamentalism, then here we are talking about another level of violence. But all armed groups use masculinity as a tool to drive fighters to continue fighting, and by that they justify the use of violence against others. However, we are now talking about another level of violence, maybe, and then we are talking about governance. We are talking about state building. We are talking about how this armed groups builds relations with other actors, and all of this. Here it matters how masculinity is used or complemented.
And in the past, decades or maybe even centuries, can you observe a continuation, or is it a disruption? Is it something new? Under Assad, like you said, it was a military ruler. Also, especially his father was a general, I believe, in the Syrian army, and that overthrew the government and yeah. But now HTS, how would you describe? Is it a disruption? Does it change, or maybe is it the same? Or how would you describe in terms of masculinity and?
Well, can I tell you this story? When I went to Syria, 3 days before going to Syria, I was commissioned by a magazine to write like kind of my comments on masculinity. And I told them, like, I'm going to Syria, so let me go and collect some field work there and do my observation. For the first 3 days, Joseph, I couldn't. Actually, I was about to email the magazine telling them, like, look, I don't want to write about masculinity because I don't think there is masculinity in Syria. I was under lots of cultural shock. I couldn't see any of the stages that made me build my theory 14 years back. And I thought, like, I'm no longer seeing the militarized or the armed pantheist men in the streets. I no longer see these stages. I no longer see the photos of Hafiz al-Assad or Bashar. And it took me 3 days to realize the new forms of masculinity, because when I was walking the streets, I saw that there are so many armed men, but I thought, like, okay, what would you expect after the fall of an old regime, like has lasted for 50 years? Of course, you will see armed men in the streets, but then what are these armed men? What are the symbols that are, or the banners in the streets, how they are calling for new men to join the military? Yes, there is a continuity of masculinity because we are having not a civilian leadership, but the background of the new leadership is coming from an armed group, a military background. So definitely they will have the ethos and values of an armed, of the armed groups. However, there is another masculinity emerging. There is continuity in masculinity, but a disruption as well. The disruption is that I don't think that Syrians, the way they were used to see masculinity so visible in the streets, there is a disruption there. The disruption is that there is a new anonymized, not central, not authoritative, and masked masculinity. Even what I mean here is that most of the security men in the streets, the armed men, they are masked, and even there is a cultural celebration to that. So you would walk in old Damascus and you will see new uniforms of men, masks, and saying, like, hailing them, hailing the new uniform of the security men, which becomes cultural because it became symbol that's sold on Syrian on Damascus streets. So men became, like, culturally they would buy these outfits and put them. So they were held. Another form of masculinity that I saw is in the way that it's continuous, or the way it disrupts. I think we wouldn't see a cult, a personality cult, even when people in Syria started to raise or hold al-Shara photos. Syrians went to social media, there was a surge of criticism against anyone holding the photo of al-Shara, saying, we will not have a personality cult again. We will not worship another figure. So, and I think this is a very an enlightening moment that we have learned from our past. However, what the Ministry of Defense is doing and the Interior Ministry, when they are calling for new men to enlist and to participate in securing Syria, they are having partners. All men are anonymous, just dressing in their military and faceless. And this can be analyzed in my own. It's early days, and I think by putting faceless men and keeping only the face of one leader, then eventually we might give the Syrian face is only given to al-Shara. So there is that kind of danger there that we might descend into cultivating a personality cult, but at the same time, I think there is cultural awareness enough to prevent that. But there is a new form of masculinity that is masked and transformed into less visible, but very powerful and intimidating as well, because the mask gives intimidation.
Let me ask you a question about Ahmed al-Shara, who is now the leader of HTS and also the leader of Syria. And earlier this year, he refused to shake hands with German Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock, which, to be honest, I don't like her politics, but maybe this is also a symbol of al-Shara's, past of Al-Qaeda, and maybe his also, view on women, and maybe he avoided handshake. We can speculate why he did this, but he's trying to strategically rebrand not only himself but HTS to transform himself as a politician, not a mercenary or soldier, and to be more accepted in not only in Western media but also in geopolitics.
Yeah.
So what symbol is it, and how do you interpret this refusal of handshake with Annalena Baerbock, the German foreign minister?
Yeah, okay. It can be two things. I think it can be two things. One of the things is that I don't think it is religious. It is something religious, and it is something. There are certain interpretations in Islam that says that man should not shake, or the woman should not shake the hands of a stranger, or if they are not relatives. I do doubt that al-Shara, with someone who is so ambitious and has went that ladder, went into that highest and fulfilled his ambitions in becoming the Syria president. I don't think it's about religion, and I think it's more about giving a statement to his base, because also there's many internal challenges for him. He cannot now suddenly, from being a jihadi, hailing his fighters to go and bomb and be to sacrifice themselves for Islam and for raising the word of God, and then suddenly telling them that I am shaking the hands of a Western like a Western country who are, according to his base, kuffar or not. You know what I mean? So it's not something. I think he was calculative, strategic. He has. I think he would say to Western audience, he would say, "This is my freedom," and he is using lots of the words like, "It's my personal rights. It's my agency." Of course, it's not all about that. It's about, like, of course, he would use the liberal discourse when it suits him, but I think it's more of a message to his audience that I am at least still stick to my Islamic standards.
Let's stick with Islam and religion, and then maybe I have two other questions that are not related to your field work and not but maybe they are off topic, but they are maybe interesting, and maybe you have an answer to them as well. But your latest article or publication is "Who Owns Sunnism? Paradox, Secticism, and Attitudes in Syria." And let's talk about this publication. Who owns Sunnism, and what are your key findings in this article?
Well, yeah, this is a book that was supposed to get published in this March, and I stopped it after the fall of Assad. I was writing the conclusion in December, and I just had to go back and change so many things. I think the initial idea, the early idea about this project was like I've got so fed up with the kind of framing the Syrian conflict as Sunni versus Alawites. I think the conflict or the struggle, the challenges is much more beyond the binary between Sunni and Alawites or Shi'i and Sunni. And I think there is also a struggle among Sunni, and my analysis of the regime's behavior for the last 50 years has always been about like they would say they are secular, but they are not secular. They would co-opt other Sufi ulama in particular. So I think even after 2011, the regime, and specifically Bashar al-Assad, was Islamizing his discourse, and he was trying to represent himself as the defender of the Muhammadi message. And that was really kind of in all of his speeches, but like Western media or the Western publication scholarship did not kind of paid attention to that. Who owns Sunnism? I think the whole conflict in the region, in the Middle East, is about who owns the representation of a true Islam. And in histories, it has always become from millennia that the Sunnis are the ummah or the nation. And I think from here, it becomes with the Iranian Revolution, it started, then it exported the revolution to many other parts. And here we have the rivalry between Saudi Arabia and Turkey, and we have the rivalry before between Saudi Arabia and Morsi. And it's all about representing Sunnism and who owns Islam. In Syria, it's the same. I think most armed factions from the oppositions were trying to call for the representations of Sunni, but also the regime was also trying to hold and say that we represent Sunnis by changing lots of things in the Ministry of Endowment or Awqaf Ministry, and also by co-opting many Sunni ulama that they became the spokesperson, and by saying that Assad is interpreting or providing a modern interpretation of Quran. All of these were very popular, not popular, I meant were kind of enforced in the Syrian culture and in Syrian mosques. And so and part of that book is focusing or collecting surveys from Syrian Sunnis, how they identify themselves, how how the sectarian relations or their relations with other sects have transformed after the war. I think the findings are really interesting because Sunnis before the fall of Assad were never unified, but I think now there is somehow a level of unifications because of the revolutionary spirit, but it's only time before the factionalism among Sunnis that will come, I think, between Sufi, Salafi, Ash'ari, and many others.
Very interesting. And let's move on to maybe also geopolitical. Let's add the geopolitical dimension, because regional powers such as Turkey and Iran also claim to be, religious from religious importance in this region. And especially Iran has its connections and proxies not only in Syria, in Lebanon, and so this is maybe the Shia, faction. Turkey, on the other side, is also competing not only with Assad on a political level, but also, for on a religious, maybe we can say, dimension. So. Who is exploiting not only religion, but let us put the other thing that we had talked about, gender. So who is exploiting from a geopolitical point of view this kind of narratives and identities such as religion, gender, and so on and so forth? What role does Turkey and Iran play in this regard?
Yeah, that's also an interesting question, and that's okay. That leads me to, you know what? I want also to just say one thing is that usually scholars understand that masculinity can only be used among the social dynamics or the state society relations or relations among individuals themselves, but also in international relations. Masculinity can be used as a theory, and I remember I used it once actually by the author was by Young. His name is it was Masculines to Protection, which about how when it's a bigger or more of a regional actor use a proxy of another small state and becomes a more of a masculine relationship, so masculine protection. And I think Turkey and Iran did the same thing. So even by understanding the relationship between Iran and Turkey, or Turkey and Syria, there is that kind of dynamic or hierarchical relationship among them. So of course Turkey used the religious narrative or the Islamic narrative, and that was so evidenced or manifested in the speeches of Erdogan by calling like we are all Muslims, and that actually undermined the Syrian refugees' rights, because when you are emotionalizing the narratives around refugees and saying like you are there is a kind of that brotherly relation, then you are in a way preventing them from going through a certain political process that ensure their safety or their status as refugee. So by foregrounding the religious narratives around Syrian refugees by Turkey, it undermined the legal protections of these refugees. And that's why we have seen in the last few years how the Syrian refugees in Turkey became a tool used by governments in Turkey to get more votes or less votes. So became more of a political tool. So religion was used once to publicly to the Turkish public that okay, Syrians are like our brothers and we share the same religion, but also Turkey has certain strategies in northern Syria. They have opened many religious schools. They have upgraded or changed or revised the Syrian educational curriculum that made more religious classes. This is for Turkey. For Iran, it's quite obvious. They used the shrines. They used Shia shrines in Syria as a way to justify their involvement in killing Syrians, and also by sending their militias. And how would they drive all of these Shia fighters to go to another country if it's not by the employing both masculinity and religion as a rhetoric to drive these fighters?
And my final question, I know it's not your you didn't research this, but maybe it's also interesting. I was also asked to ask you a question, but it is not related. It's about Afghanistan, but maybe you have an opinion on that. For example, it has to do with the relationship between masculinity and homosexuality, and maybe we can transform the question on Syria. So the question was about bachabazi. Bachabazi refers to a homosexual practice in Afghanistan in which men exploit enslaved young boys for entertainment. So the boys are dressed in girls' clothing, women clothing for entertainment, and there is also sexual abuse and many other forms of abuses. And many of them are coming from vulnerable situations, street children, mainly without relatives or without food in many cases, and so on and so forth. So we have this phenomenon in Afghanistan for centuries, for decades. And under the Taliban, it was forbidden. And I'm not sure how the law is now in Afghanistan. I'm not an expert. But I was asked to ask you this question, if we can observe some sort of Bachabazi in Syria. And if that's not the case, let's broaden up the question. How is Syrian society, but also the regime's attitude towards homosexuality? Is it forbidden? Is it like death penalty, as in I believe in Iran? It's under heavy sanction? So yeah, what can you say about this topic, about homosexuality?
I think it has under the Ba'athist regime, homosexuality and even committing punishing your kids, like having physical kind of against your, like hitting, spanking your kids was allowed and legal. So in the Syrian law, there is no specific article that specifies certain punishment for homosexuality, but there is that it's under the new leadership, or after the fall, before the fall of the regime, and during the conflict, we have heard many abuses and violations against LGBTQ communities, and that was quite evidenced, where victims were pushed from high buildings, killed in a very horrific ways. And we have seen also examples in the last few 2 months, that we have seen on social media, that certain non-binary individuals were also abused and punished and repressed, but they were not killed, or like there is no legal punishment till now, but there might be some violations in the future because of the lack of legalization. So I would expect that the abuses and the violence against LGBTQ will continue. I don't think the Syrian society or the Syrian culture can address this topic now because of its sensitivity. I think also the new leadership won't be that extrovert about any of these abuses. Even if they were committed, they wouldn't even say that we are issuing a certain legal thing against LGBTQ community. So I think they will take it and leave it as such, to and that would exacerbate violence against these communities, against LGBTQ. However, I would still, the new leadership needs external recognition, needs to be delisted, and does not want another kind of issue to be accountable or held accountable for. So I think they will put it under the table for the time being, but I don't think the LGBTQ community will be safe, or they might face any repercussions because of their personal and personal choices.
And maybe now my final question. What do you think about Western perception of Arab men, of Arab societies? Because Jaspir Puar coined the frame homo nationalism, because I observe in Western media that our racism is now under the cover because we cannot be openly, racist. So nobody wants to be called a racist in today's society. And we, the Western liberal societies, we are so political correct, so nobody wants to be a racist. But we are. So let's be honest. And we hide it in a more, subtle way, in a more, hidden way, in a more, And so Jasper Poir coined this term, and so this mix up nationalism with defending human rights, defending the rights of homosexuals, and so this barbaric Middle East and so on and so forth. So how do you observe Western narratives and maybe Western perception of Arab men and masculinity and sexuality in the Middle East and
I would add also minority. Western perceptions on all of this kind of masculinity, the Arab man, and also we want to protect minorities and we want to protect LGBTQ, all fine. But I think there is more of these narratives strip Syrians of their agency. We need partnerships, collaborations, but not supervised or like having an international community supervise us or come and teach us. Like, you know what I mean? So we need something that we go in collaboration with the international community to empower us, but not to supervise us or come and dictate us. And I think that's where Arab men, in terms of, and as you've just put it completely correct, and I do agree with you that masculinity, and actually I will say this here, I have never said it. I only said it like among my friends in close circles, that from my experience for the last 14 years in the UK and going through the system here, me being an Arab woman from a background, even with my British citizenship, still masculinity and gender bias and racism plays great kind of shape the relationship between the system and me. So it's no longer different. We have a different forms of masculinity in the UK or in Western world, but like there in Syria, it's so obvious, so clear that you fight with it, and it's so like like in front of you. But here it's hidden, it's complicated, it's even bureaucratized. Like even within the bureaucracy, it becomes that you experience it. But yes, I would say that the Western narratives regarding gender, women's rights, and minorities, and it's all essentialist and a continuation of colonial legacies, and it helps actually it fractionalized Syrian sovereignty and Syrian agency.
Yeah, it's unfortunate to hear from you that in the UK there is also this mechanism and cultural. Johan Galtung, the great peace scholar, coined it cultural violence. Spivak and many others called it epistemic violence, so that you are oppressed in a not physical way, but indirectly and more maybe from psychology and maybe institutional way. But it is sad to hear that in the 21st century. And so to be a little bit funny, so you are against the paternalistic Western concept of
definitely
bombing them into democracy and
I don't believe. I think you cannot force my way of being an academic and having studied the transition to democracy among so many contexts. I don't think secularism can be enforced. Even if you write the best constitution ever, you need culture, you need a political culture that supports transition to democracy, and building a political culture suitable for democracy and inclusivity and transparency needs decades. How can we challenge the authoritarian legacies of 5 decades? It needs time, and it's not going to happen by just destroying the status of Assad.
Dear Rahaf, I thank you very much for this conversation, and I learned a lot from your papers, and thank you very much for
Thank you,
being here.
Josef, for inviting me. It has been great in having like this kind of informal chat, and I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you very much.